The human mind is a fragile and fertile ground. It yearns for purpose, for belonging, for a truth greater than itself. And in that quiet, aching space, a master manipulator can plant a seed of an idea so compelling, so beautiful, that it takes root and grows into an all-consuming belief. This is the story of such a man, and the garden of souls he cultivated only to poison. His name was Elias Thorne, and the first time you saw him, you didn't see a threat. You saw a prophet. He didn't preach from a grand pulpit or stand on a soapbox in a busy park. Elias started his ministry in a small rented community hall on the outskirts of Tucson, Arizona. He was a tall man, lean with a sharp jawline and eyes the color of a stormy sea. His voice was the kind that could hold a room captive, a soft baritone that seemed to resonate deep within your chest. It was 1998 and the world was buzzing with a peculiar kind of anxiety. The new millennium was approaching, a digital apocalypse looming with the Y2K bug, and a general unease settled over those who felt left behind by the march of progress. Elias offered them a different path, a sanctuary from the coming storm. He called it the Sanctuary of Light. His initial teachings were harmless, even inspiring. He spoke of community, of self-sufficiency, of living in harmony with nature and each other. He encouraged his followers to disconnect from the world's materialistic trappings. The first members were a motley crew, a single mother seeking a fresh start, a retired schoolteacher disillusioned with society, a couple of college students looking for spiritual guidance. They called themselves the Chosen, and their early days were filled with a simple, almost pastoral joy. They bought a sprawling, isolated property in the high desert of Nevada, a place where the sun was harsh and the nights were cold. It was a blank canvas, and Elias promised they would paint a new world there, a paradise untouched by the corruption of the outside. But the seeds of deception were there from the very beginning, subtly woven into the fabric of their new life. The small things came first. Elias began to speak of a new kind of currency, based on labor and trust, not money. Members were encouraged to sell their worldly possessions and donate the funds to the collective. They were told it was a test of faith, a way to purify themselves for the ascension. Most complied without question. After all, if they were truly building a new world, what need was there for the old one's trinkets? Then came the rules. Initially they seemed reasonable. No television, no radio, no internet, distractions that polluted the mind. Then no contact with former friends or family who hadn't joined the sanctuary. They will only try to hold you back, Elias would say, his voice full of a gentle, paternal concern. They don't understand our truth. The followers accepted this too. They were the chosen after all. The bond they had with Elias and each other was stronger than any outside connection. They were a family and he was their father, their guide, their only link to the light. But with each passing month, Elias's grip tightened. He stopped being just a spiritual guide and became a judge, a warden, and a deity. He demanded unwavering loyalty and unquestioning obedience. The mild-mannered man who once spoke of peace now preached about the imminent cleansing, a cataclysm that would wipe the world clean of all sin. The only way to survive, he claimed, was to be pure of heart and to live in absolute devotion to him. He started referring to himself not just as a prophet, but as the conduit, the only vessel through which the divine will could be expressed. The whispers of doubt began small, like dust motes in a sunbeam. A young woman named Sarah, who had joined with her boyfriend, was the first to openly question him. She asked why the sanctuary needed to build an underground bunker. Elias's reaction was swift and terrifying. He didn't rage. He simply looked at her with an expression of profound sadness and disappointment, a gaze that made her feel as though she had committed a grave sin. He then publicly shamed her, labeling her a spirit of disharmony, and ordered her to spend 3 days in isolation, meditating on her transgression. The message was clear to everyone. Questioning Elias was not a mistake, it was an act of rebellion. The line between spiritual guidance and psychological abuse blurred until it vanished entirely. The long days of farming and building were replaced by grueling, nonsensical tasks and forced, ritualized chanting. Sleep became a luxury. Food became a reward for perfect obedience. Elias's charisma was no longer a gentle allure. It was a weapon used to control, to punish, and to break the spirits of those who had entrusted him with their lives. The fear of the outside world, which had drawn them in, was now replaced by a far more immediate terror, the fear of Elias Thorne. The final act of deception began on a cold, desolate night in November 2001. Elias gathered the remaining 27 followers in the main common hall. He stood before them, not with his usual calm demeanor, but with a wild, fanatical gleam in his eyes. "The cleansing is at hand," he declared, his voice echoing in the silent room. "We will not witness it. We will ascend before the fire rains down. Our spirits will be reunited with the cosmic light." He told them the time had come to purify their bodies with a sacred drink. The followers, exhausted and utterly broken, believed him without a second thought. They lined up and drank a bitter concoction from metal cups, their faces serene with the promise of eternal peace. It was not a sacred drink. It was a poison. This is where the story of Elias Thorne truly becomes a horror show. The poison worked quickly, bringing with it a violent end for those who drank it. Elias watched without a trace of emotion as the members of his sanctuary of light writhed on the floor, their promised ascension turning into a brutal, final betrayal. He had planned to go with them to ascend as well, a final, twisted act of piety. But at the last moment he hesitated. The terror in the eyes of his dying followers, the sounds of their last gasps, something in it must have captivated him. He didn't take his own dose. Instead, he stood over the corpses of the people who had given him everything. It was a cold, quiet night in the Nevada desert, a night that would become a landmark in the history of crime, but at that moment, it was just the aftermath of a liar's final, murderous act. The sanctuary of light was no more. It had become a tomb. For 3 days, Elias Thorne remained in the silent, poison-filled commune. He later confessed to investigators that he had no plan, no escape route, and no real reason for staying. He simply existed in the quiet horror he had created, a king alone in his kingdom of ghosts. The desert wind rattled the windows of the common hall, a mournful sound that was the only witness to his final descent into madness. He ate what was left of the commune's rations, drank from their well, and walked among the bodies of the people who had trusted him. He said he was waiting for a sign, for a message, but none came. There was only silence and the cold, hard reality of what he had done. The alarm was raised not by a fleeing survivor, but by a worried sister. A woman named Maria Garcia, whose brother, a former electrician named Javier, had joined the sanctuary 2 years earlier. Maria had tried to contact him for months, but her calls went unanswered and her letters returned. A news report about a minor earthquake in the Nevada desert reminded her of the isolated location of the cult's compound, and an instinct, cold and sharp as a knife, told her something was terribly wrong. She drove the 9 hours from Los Angeles to the Sanctuary of Light, following a dirt road for miles until she saw the sprawling compound in the distance. When she arrived, she found the main gate ajar, an ominous invitation into a place of profound stillness. What Maria found inside was a scene of unspeakable horror. She stumbled upon the bodies in the common hall, a mass of lifeless forms arranged in a grotesque tableau. Her scream shattered the desert's quiet. She ran, her mind a blank slate of pure terror, until she reached her car and drove back to the nearest town, where she collapsed in front of the sheriff's office. The local authorities were ill-equipped to handle such a scene. The small sheriff's department in Goldfield, Nevada, had never dealt with anything more severe than a bar fight or a stray cattle incident. When the deputies arrived at the Sanctuary of Light, their initial shock gave way to a grim and painstaking investigation. They called in the Nevada State Police, and soon a team of seasoned detectives, forensic specialists, and even an FBI liaison arrived on the scene. They found Elias Thorne in the small wooden cabin he had designated as his private sanctuary. He didn't resist. He sat at a small desk, staring at a blank piece of paper, a pen clutched in his hand. He looked gaunt, his eyes hollowed out by 3 days of lonely vigil. When asked to identify himself, he simply said, "I am the conduit. I was waiting for you." He spoke not with the bombast of a self-proclaimed messiah, but with the quiet resignation of a man whose grand performance had finally ended. The investigation that followed was a descent into a psychological labyrinth. The detectives, led by a seasoned veteran named Detective Mark Hayes, pieced together the story not from Elias's cryptic ramblings, but from the journals found in the victims' cabins. They were a chilling chronicle of hope, devotion, and slow, creeping despair. The journals of Javier Garcia, the electrician, were particularly heartbreaking. They began with a sense of wonder, a man grateful to have found a place where he felt valued and understood. But as the months wore on, his entries grew shorter, more sparse, and then a chilling change in tone. "Elias says the world is turning to fire," Javier wrote in a shaking hand. "He says we must be pure. I am so tired." His final entry was just a single, scribbled word: ascension. The forensic evidence confirmed the story. The bitter-tasting liquid found in the metal cups was a potent mixture of cyanide and a powerful sedative. The cause of death for all 27 victims was acute poisoning. Elias's fingerprints were on the cups, on the containers of poison, and on the journals he had meticulously kept, documenting the spiritual and psychological progress of his followers, a horrifying record of his own twisted game. The trial of Elias Thorne was a media sensation. He was a symbol of a generation's anxieties, a dark mirror reflecting a deep-seated human need to believe in something, anything greater than oneself. But in the courtroom, Elias was no longer the charismatic leader. He was a small, pale man, dressed in an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit. His stormy eyes, once so full of a hypnotic power, now seemed vacant, a little lost. The prosecution's case was airtight, built on forensic evidence, the testimony of Maria Garcia, and the chilling first-hand accounts from the victims' journals. Elias's defense was a plea of insanity. His lawyers argued that he genuinely believed he was a divine conduit, that he was acting on a higher authority, and that he was as much a victim of his own delusions as his followers were. The prosecution countered with a simple, brutal truth. Elias had not taken the poison. He had orchestrated the deaths of others while saving himself. It was a conscious act of murder, not a shared delusion. The jury took only 4 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on 27 counts of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life without parole, a fate he accepted with the same quiet resignation he had shown since his arrest. He never expressed remorse. In his final statement before the sentencing, he looked directly at the camera, a flicker of his old charisma returning to his eyes for just a moment. "I did not deceive them," he said, his voice a whisper that was broadcast to millions. "They chose to believe. The lie was never mine. It was theirs." The sanctuary of light was eventually dismantled, its buildings torn down, the land sold off. The desert reclaimed the space, erasing the physical scars of the tragedy. But the psychological wounds remained, a lasting reminder of a simple but terrifying truth. A charismatic lie, when given enough time and fertile ground, can become a deadly reality. The legacy of Elias Thorne is not one of a prophet or a cult leader. It is the story of a predator who used the universal human search for meaning as his hunting ground, and in the end, destroyed everyone who dared to follow his false light.